The strike order was half read when the human stood up, and Cyril Ahn, who had come to Viance Hall that morning for a dead clerk's pension and nothing else, set down her stylus to watch a career end. For cause, the registrar of the rolls was saying, in the flat liturgical drone the College of Envoys used for everything from trade accords to funerals. The envoy June Sarrett, human, 4 years accredited, is struck from the rolls of standing. Count the first. Falsification of a lane certificate in the matter of the Vessing corridor. Count the second. Breach of the closed session. Count the third. Misuse of the college seal. The strike takes force at the closing of this session, and her name shall be lined through in the presence of the assembly. 190 worlds kept seats in Vance Hall, and most of them had sent somebody to watch. That was the first thing Cyril noticed, because it was wrong. A strike was a housekeeping item. Strikes were read between freight schedules, to a chamber of empty benches and dozing proxies. This one had drawn full galleries, the upper tiers packed shoulder to shoulder, and the seats of the Brel Combine, all 11 of them, filled an hour early, their delegates sitting forward like patrons who had paid for the show. The second thing she noticed was the human. June Sarrett did not look like a woman being professionally executed. She stood in the open floor below the registrar's bench, hands loose at her sides, 27 years old by the record, small even for her small species, and she watched the registrar read out the destruction of her name the way a surveyor watches weather. When he reached the third count, she tilted her head slightly, as if checking his arithmetic. The registrar, a heavy gray Tellurite named Coleth Vam, lowered the order and reached for the gavel of session. It was 4 centimeters from his hand when the human spoke. Before the gavel, June Sarrett said, "I have a filing." Vam's hand stopped. In the galleries, 1,000 breathing apparatuses adjusted at once, a sound like surf. "The session is not open to filings from struck persons," Vam said. "I'm not struck until the gavel," she said. "You wrote the rule. I'm using it." She crossed the floor, 11 steps, Cyril counted them, and laid a bound petition on the registrar's desk, square to the edge, the way you place something you have measured. Her voice carried without being raised. Petition under Article 9 of the Charter of the Tessin Accord. June Sarrett, envoy against the College of Envoys, wrongful erasure. I'm suing the college. It would be repeated for a year afterward in chancery bars and guild halls and the long galleries of Cauldrol Ring, what the chamber did in the moment after she said it. Some said uproar. Cyril was there, and it was not uproar, it was worse. It was the sound of 2,000 officials simultaneously trying to remember what Article 9 said, the rustle of charter copies being pulled up on tablets, the click of secretaries leaning into the ears of delegates, the long, low whistle of a Brel breath valve somewhere above her, which among the Brel meant something had gone off script. Article 9, the Dead Clause. Drafted by the founders 3 centuries ago, when the accord was 11 worlds and a promise, so that no organ of the accord could destroy a servant of the accord in the dark. Used twice in the first decade, never since. Every advocate on the ring had read it once, as an apprentice, the way you read the burial customs of a country you will never visit. Any envoy struck from the rolls may petition the court of the charter against the college, the clause said, and the strike shall not take force while the petition lives. The gavel never came down. Coleth Vam looked at the petition on his desk, and then at the gallery where the Brel sat, and Cyril watched him understand, in real time, that he could not close the session without making the strike final, and could not make the strike final without breaking the charter in front of 190 worlds. He adjourned instead. The word came out of him like a tooth. June Sarrett picked up her copy stamp from the desk, inclined her head to the bench with perfect courtesy, and walked out of Vance Hall through the long axis of the floor, alone, past 11 Brel delegates who did not look at her, and 400 others who looked at nothing else. Cyril Ahn went back to her chambers on the 9th gallery and told her clerk with some satisfaction that she had finally seen a genuinely new thing in 30 years of practice, and that she pitied the fool who would have to argue it. 9 days later, the new thing was sitting in her waiting room. Cyril knew the arithmetic before the human opened her mouth, because the ring was a small town wearing a station's body and advocates gossip worse than dock crews. 11 chambers had declined the Sarrett petition. 11, Holland and Vance, who took anything with a fee attached, had declined. Old Madrigan, who had once sued a planetary navy over a fishing skiff, had declined by sealed note within an hour of being asked. The Vethna sisters had reportedly not even let her pass the door, which was remarkable, because the Vethna sisters kept a sign in their window that said no cause refused. Nobody had to explain why. The College of Envoys licensed every advocate who practiced before any organ of the accord. You could sue a polity, a fleet, a cartel, a church. You did not sue the body that owned your name on behalf of a human in front of the galaxy, with the Brel Combine watching from 11 seats. There was no version of that case that ended with your practice intact. The only question was whether you lost it before the court of the charter or in a licensing review 2 years later, quietly, for unrelated reasons. So when Bren put his head around the door, Bren Ottle, her clerk, a Seleth youth with paper-pale skin and an unprofessional fondness for lost causes, and said, "The human is here, the one from the hall, she doesn't have an appointment." Cyril said what 11 other advocates had said. "Tell her I'm engaged. She says she'll wait. Tell her I'm engaged indefinitely." Bren withdrew. Cyril returned to the pension brief of the late clerk Hommel. 40 years of faithful service to the Lanes Bureau, reduced to a dispute over 400 credits of death benefit, which was the kind of case she took. Small, dry, winnable, beneath the notice of anyone who could hurt her. The Murrick had a saying, "The tall tree is a list of storms," and Cyril On had spent a career being shrub height on purpose. The human waited 4 hours. Cyril knew because at the end of them she had to walk through her own waiting room to reach the tea cabinet. And there she was, June Sarrett, sitting upright on the bench with a document case on her knees, reading the frahakop of Cyril's charter advocate oath on the wall as though it were worth reading. Up close, humans were worse. It was the faces. A Murrick face had 4 muscles and the good manners to use them sparingly. A human face was a riot in a bone bowl, 40 muscles flinching and weathering and leaking the inside of the skull into open air, and you could not stop reading it, and you could not trust what you read. Cyril had handled exactly 2 human matters in her career, both freight, both settled by post specifically, so she would not have to sit in a room with that endless traffic of expression. June Sarrett's face was doing something Cyril had no entry for in her catalog. It was still, not the stillness of the dead or the stupid, banked, like a drawn-down fire. "Advocate on," the human said, rising. "I won't take much of your time. You were in the hall. You saw the filing. I need counsel of charter rank to carry it, or the petition dies of formality in 20 days, and they gavel the strike." "And I am the 12th name on a list of 12, Cyril said. "I am nobody's first choice for a landmark. I do pensions and freight." Envoy Sarrett. "You did reval against the Lanes Bureau. 19 years ago. You found a misdated docket nobody else had read, and a bureau director retired over it." The human set the document case on the tea table and opened it, and Cyril saw, with a sensation she would later have trouble naming, that everything inside was squared, tabbed, and cross-indexed in a hand so level it might have been machined. "I'm not asking you to believe in me. I'm asking you to read my strike order. That's all. If you read it and there's nothing in it, I'll go." There are 11 advocates on this ring who have already declined to read it. None of them declined after reading it, June Sarrett said. They declined before. There's a difference, and I think you're the kind of advocate the difference matters to. It was flattery, and Cyril knew it was flattery, and it was also, this was the infuriating part, simply true. She took the order. She had meant to skim it standing up, hand it back, and say something kind and final about the woman's prospects. She read it twice. Then she carried it to her desk, took out the loop she used on freight seals, and read it a 3rd time. "You see it," the human said quietly. What Cyril saw was a docket number. Every cause file the college opened was numbered in sequence from the founding, 1 ledgered integer at a time, a vanity of record-keeping 300 years old. The college was proud that you could date any file in its archive to the week by its number alone. The cause file against June Sarrett, the file that allegedly documented her crimes, bore a number from the 2nd week of the month of coring. The Lane certificate she was accused of falsifying was dated the 4th week of coring, 9 days. The file had been opened 9 days before the offense it documented existed. Somebody had decided to destroy this woman, opened the drawer to do it, and then gone looking for a reason, and they had been so confident, so untouchable in their own house, that they had not even troubled to forge the arithmetic. "It could be clerical," Cyril said. "Renumbering, a transposed entry." "It could be," the human said. "There's one way to find out, and it's discovery. And discovery needs a suit, and a suit needs you. You understand what this is?" Cyril said. "Not a case. A siege. You are proposing to besiege the College of Envoys inside its own walls with a dead clause and a clerical error, and sieges are paid for in years. They will not fight you on the law. The law takes an afternoon. They will fight you on cost. They will price your suit in everything you have, and then they will price it in everything I have. And the court of the charter cannot give either of us any of it back. You have seen what they did to your name in 1 morning. What do you imagine they will do to mine in 2 years?" For the first time the human stillness moved, not much, a settling around the eyes, and Cyril, fluent in no human expression, understood this one without translation because it was not human at all. It was the look of a creditor. "They took my name off the rolls with 3 lies, June Sarrett said. "I checked the lies. I filed before the gavel. I've been to 12 doors, and I'll go to 12 more, and if every door on this ring stays shut, I'll argue Article 9 alone badly and lose, and they'll gavel me out. And even then, I'll have made 190 worlds watch them do it twice. She closed the document case. But the docket number advocate, the docket number deserves better than me. She left her case file and a retainer warrant on the tea table, thanked Cyril for the 4 hours, and was gone before Cyril assembled an answer. Cyril On sat alone in her chambers for a long time that evening, with the strike order on the desk in front of her and her practice arranged around her like a small, warm, defensible burrow, the pension briefs, the freight schedules, the framed oath. 30 years of being shrub height on purpose. It was not the human speech that finished her, she would always insist. The speech she could have survived. It was the loop still lying on the order, and the number under it, sitting there in its own ink, patient as a stone in a shoe. A file opened 9 days before its cause. They hadn't even bothered to lie carefully. That was the part that breached her. Not the cruelty, which was ordinary, but the contempt. The assumption, built into the very arithmetic of the thing, that no one who mattered would ever check, because the only person was standing to check was a human, and humans did not count. Cyril had spent 30 years keeping clear of the institution's weather, and the institution had spent those same years learning that nobody would ever check. "Bryn," she said, when her clerk came in to bank the lamps. "Send to the consular annex. Tell Envoy Sarat she has counsel." Bryn, pale 18, hired for his ledger hand and kept for his nerve, read the strike order on the desk, looked at the retainer warrant, looked at his employer, and did not say any of the sensible things. "Yes, advocate," he said. "Shall I open a file?" "Open a file," Cyril said. "Number it carefully." The Tessin Accord had been governed for 3 centuries from Cauldrel Ring, a wheel of white alloy turning above a gas giant's amber weather, and on the ring the morning was a legal fiction observed by lamplight. By the legal morning following her decision, Cyril On had entered her appearance before the Court of the Charter as counsel of record in Sarat against the College of Envoys, and by the legal afternoon, she had lost her first 2 clients. They did not say why. The Hummel pension matter was withdrawn with thanks by a nephew who would not meet her eyes. A freight consortium that had kept her on retainer for 11 years discovered, in a letter of regretful elegance, that its needs had evolved. Bren entered both losses in the chamber's ledger without comment, in his level hand, and started a second ledger page that he headed, with a clerk's bleak humor, Evolved Needs. The page would be full before the equinox. The Court of the Charter convened, when it convened at all, in the chamber of the first sitting, the original council room of the original 11 worlds, preserved at the hub of the ring like a relic in amber. A plain round room of riveted hull, plate and a horseshoe table of actual wood, under a glass cap through which the gas giant rolled its amber storms. No tiers, no galleries to speak of, 60 observer seats. After the founder's fashion, the court owned no permanent judges. When a petition lived, 3 assessors were drawn by lot from a standing list of retired jurists of the member polities, and for the term of the case they outranked everything in the accord but the charter itself. The lot gave Sarat against the college 3 names. Ottavin Krail, once chief magistrate of a Yendri ice republic, ancient hairless, with a stare like a docking laser, assessor prime by seniority. Melsora, a Vethri arbitrator who had spent 50 years pricing cargo disputes and was said to have once found against her own mother on the weight of a bill of lading. And Dren Kavath, a heavy amphibious jurist of the Ulswader Compact who slept visibly, unapologetically, through anything that did not matter, and woke with unnerving precision the instant anything did. Opposite Cyril's small table, the college fielded 6 advocates in college gray, and at their head Vale Odrun. Cyril knew Odrun the way a coastal town knows the sea. Counsel to the college for 2 decades, silver-skinned, soft-voiced, with the long dray habit of pausing before he spoke, as if consulting some interior ledger of everything you had ever done wrong. He had never lost in front of an organ of the accord. It was said in the chancery bars that Vile Odrun did not win cases. He explained regretfully why you had already lost, and the bench wrote it down. He opened, as she had known he would, with the motion to bury. "The petition is a curiosity," Odrun told the assessors, regretful, unhurried. Article 9 is founder's scaffolding, erected when the accord was 11 rooms in a corridor, never dismantled out of sentiment. 3 centuries of practice have replaced it. The college disciplines its own roles. That discipline is internal governance. Internal governance is not justiciable. The court should decline the petition with the respect owed to an antique and permit an embarrassing episode to close. Assessor Prime Krail turned his docking laser stare on Cyril. "Counsel for the petitioner. Is the clause an antique?" Cyril rose. She was aware of her own pulse and her breath valves, of the 60 observer seats packed beyond capacity, of June Sarat sitting beside her, still as a banked fire, hands folded on a document case squared to the table's edge. "The Charter of the Tessin Accord," Cyril said, "contains no chapter titled Antiques. My colleague is asking this court to find that some of the charter's words are alive and some are dead, and that the college, alone among the organs of the accord, holds the privilege of deciding which are which, in its own cause, in its own house. The assessors might ask him where that privilege is written. It is not in the charter. The charter says any envoy. The charter says shall not take force. The founders wrote a small clause for a small and specific terror, that an organ of this accord might one day destroy a servant of this accord in the dark, and call it housekeeping. She laid her hand flat on the strike order. The petitioner asked for nothing antique. She asked for the live words of the live charter, and for one open drawer. Drenkavitz's eyes came open. The clause carries a discovery provision, Krail said. Clause the fourth, you intend to invoke it. I intend, Cyril said, to build the case on it. She watched the 6 advocates in college gray go very carefully motionless, and understood that they had hoped, until that exact moment, that she had not read all the way to clause the fourth. The court of the charter retired for the length of one meal, and came back with the motion to dismiss denied, the petition sustained as justiciable, and the strike stayed in full pending judgment. Mel Sora read the order in a cargo arbitrator's voice, dry as manifest paper, and Cyril heard, behind her in the observer seats, the small sound of a breath valve whistling low. The petition lives, Krail said. Counsel will attend the question of discovery at the next sitting. We are adjourned. There was no gavel in the chamber of the first sitting. The founders had used a bell. It rang once, small and clear, and June Sarrett turned to her advocate and said, in the flat-level voice of a woman checking arithmetic, one drawer. One drawer, Cyril said. Now they price the siege. She was not wrong by a single day. The licensing notice, Advocate Cyril on, conduct review, unrelated matters, dates to be determined, was waiting in her chambers before the bell's echo had cooled. Clause the fourth of Article 9 ran to a single sentence, and Cyril had taken to reciting it to herself at night the way other species prayed. In the trial of a petition under this article, the drawer of the college stands open to the court, and no writing of the college touching the matter complained of shall be withheld from it. The founders had written it plainly because they had meant it plainly. An institution accused of destroying its own servant could not also be custodian of the proof. The drawer stands open. 300 years of constitutional commentary had grown over the clause like vine over a door. But the door was still a door, and at the second sitting, Cyril asked the court to open it. O'Droon fought with everything that was not the text because the text could not be fought. He offered privilege, the deliberations of governance, counsel in contemplation of policy. He offered floods. The college generates 400,000 writings in a quarter. Surely counsel does not propose to read them. He offered, with exquisite regret, delay, a special master, a committee of review, a protocol to be negotiated between the parties over some reasonable span of seasons, by which time, he did not say this part aloud. He did not have to. The petitioner would be starved out, the advocate would be priced out, and the drawer could be reorganized at leisure. Mel Sora heard him out the way she had presumably heard 50 years of freight captains explain why the cargo had weighed less at delivery than at lading. The clause says drawer stands open, she said. It does not say the drawer stands open after negotiation. Produce. The college, Audrin said, will of course comply with its obligations as it understands them. Cyril was on her feet before he finished the sentence. Assessors, the petitioner asked that the order use the clause's own words, not obligations as understood. The drawer, open. Krail's stare rested on Audrin for a moment, and Cyril saw the old magistrate take the measure of the phrase as it understands them with the air of a jurist who had spent a century watching institutions hide whole archives inside their own understanding. The order will issue in the language of the charter, Krail said. All writings of the college touching the matter complained of. The court will take a narrow view of nothing. We are adjourned. The college complied the way a glacier complies with spring. 41 crates arrived at Cyril's chambers in the dark span of a single ring night, unannounced, stacked in the 9th gallery corridor to the height of a standing murek, lane schedules, decorum circulars, 3 decades of catering invoices for the closed sessions, the complete maintenance record of the Vayance Hall acoustics, every one of June Sarrett's expense filings since her accreditation, each crate sealed, certified, and indexed according to a system that referenced a master index that was not included. It was compliance as ordinance. A barrage of paper meant to bury a 2 advocate chambers past digging out, and it had clearly been assembled in advance because no institution moved 41 crates in a night out of sudden virtue. Bren stood in the corridor at lamprise, surveying the wall of certified chaff, and said, "They've sent us their floor sweepings and kept the knives." "Of course they have," Cyril said. "The sweepings are the message. The message is, prove we kept knives." She set her palm against the nearest crate, feeling through the board the cold institutional confidence of it. So we prove it. It was the human who found the lever, and she found it because she read everything. That was the quality Cyril had not priced into her client at the tea table, and the one she would remember longest. June Sarrett read certified chaff 14 hours a day, without complaint and without skipping, in the storeroom of the human consular annex where she now slept. Her quarters on the diplomatic deck having been revoked, with apologies, for maintenance that had no scheduled end. She read catering invoices. She read acoustic surveys. She built, in that machined level hand, a concordance of 41 crates, and somewhere in the third week, cross-referencing the college's own internal post log, included in crate 30 as padding, because to the college it was padding, she found the routing slips. Every writing that moved between college offices moved under a routing slip: sender, recipient, file number, seal impression, hour of transit. The post log recorded the slips, and the post log showed, in the second week of coring, 9 days before the famine waiver, 9 days before the alleged offense, the same week as the impossible docket number, a burst of traffic to and from the office of the first warden of the college under a file designation that appeared nowhere in the 41 crates. Not one missing writing. 43 of them in 11 days, everyone logged in transit and everyone absent from production, like a fleet that existed only in its wakes. They produced the log that proves they didn't produce, June said. She had brought the concordance to Chambers at midnight and stood at Cyril's desk in the lamplight with shadows under her eyes like thumbprints. Cadding crate 30. Nobody read their own sweepings. Cyril looked at the column of transit entries, each one a small clerical tombstone, and felt the case turn under her hands for the first time, the heavy, unmistakable shift of a siege engine taking weight. 43 writings, she said, touching the matter complained of, moved under the warden's own designation, withheld from a charter order. She looked up at her client. Envoy, do you understand what a court does to an institution it catches doing this? I understand what they'll do first, June said. They'll say the slips reference routine governance. They'll say the designation is privileged policy work. They'll need every slip to have an innocent explanation, and there are 43 of them, and explanations are work. So they'll do something cheaper instead. She straightened the concordance's edge against the desk, a small exact motion. They'll offer me my name back. The offer arrived 11 days later. In the gap between the motion to compel and the hearing of it, hand-carried by a college undersecretary to Cyril's chambers in the manner of a gift of fruit, reinstatement to the rolls, fullback stipend, the strike vacated as improvidently entered, the cause file sealed by consent, no admissions, all parties to bear their own costs, the petition withdrawn with prejudice. Generosity itself provided the drawer closed forever. Cyril read it aloud in the annex storeroom, by the light of a freight lamp, to a client sitting on a cot between two towers of indexed chaff. They concede everything you asked for, Cyril said, when she had finished, because counsel's duty was to say it: the name, the stipend, the seat. 2 years of siege gets you nothing more than this paper gets you tonight, and 2 years of siege can also get you nothing at all. I am obliged to tell you that any rational envoy signs it. June Sarrett was quiet for a moment, looking at the offer where it lay on the cot. Does it say the cause was false? She asked. It says improvidently entered. Improvidently. The human almost smiled. They wrote 3 lies into the permanent record of 190 worlds, and the price of my name is that the lies get a sealed room to live in. She handed the paper back. They're not offering me my name, advocate. They're offering me their version of it. Tell the court we proceed. You should sleep on it. I'm sleeping in a storeroom on the charity of a consulate, June said, lying back on the cot with her eyes already closing, entirely level, entirely without self-pity, as if reporting the weather of some distant moon. I sleep on it every night. Proceed. Cyril walked home the long way around the 9th gallery, past her own dark chambers, and found that the corridor wall opposite her door had acquired, in fresh stylus, a line of Murex script at standing height. She counts against us. It was the old tally idiom, the accusation a guild laid against a member whose conduct cost the whole guild standing. Somebody had not even troubled to write it in the human's direction. The human was beside the point. The traitor was the one with the license. She did not report it. She copied it into the case ledger, dated in her own hand, because a siege should keep accounts, and went in and slept 4 hours and rose for the motion to compel. The hearing of the motion was the first time the galaxy at large understood what Article 9's open drawer actually meant, and attendance at the chamber of the first sitting overflowed into the corridor. Cyril put the post log on the horseshoe table. She put the concordance beside it. She walked the assessors through the wakes of the ghost fleet. 43 writings, 11 days, 1 designation, 0 produced, in the dry voice she used for freight seals, and she watched Drenkovoth, the sleeping amphibian, sit fully upright for the first time in the proceedings and stay that way. O'Droon rose with his interior ledger and his regret. The designation in question, he said, covers deliberative instruments of governance, the college's counsel to itself in contemplation of policy. The drawer of Clause the Fourth was never intended. Counselor, Melsora said, were the writings in contemplation of policy or in contemplation of the petitioner? The college's policy deliberations frequently concern personnel as a class. Then the court will read them, Sora said, and discover which. In chambers, if you like. The clause does not recognize a privilege, Counselor. I have looked. It says no writing. The founders had recently been lied to by an institution. It shows in their drafting. The college was ordered to deliver the 43 writings to the assessors within 5 days, under the personal seal of its first warden, with a certificate that production was complete. Crail added the last requirement himself without raising his voice, and Cyril understood it for what it was. The old magistrate quietly moving the college's most senior officer into the line of consequence. If anything further went missing, it would now go missing over the first warden's own name. The bell rang. The corridor crowds parted around June Sarrett as she left, not in courtesy but in the way crowds part around weather. And that evening, for the first time, a thing happened that the college had not priced. A Yendri envoy of 40 years standing, whom June had never met, stopped her in the gallery, looked both ways down the corridor, and pressed into her hands a string bag of eating moss and a slip of paper. The paper said in a shaking formal hand, "My niece was struck in 61 for cause. We signed their offer. The cause was false. Hold." June Sarrett read it twice, folded it into her document case with the squared exactness she did everything, and held. The 43 writings came to the assessors on the 5th day, under the first warden's seal, with the certificate of completeness signed in a hand Cyril would come to know very well, a tall, spare, backward-leaning script, like a man perpetually departing. The court read them in chambers, alone over 2 days, while the ring talked of nothing else, and the chancery bars ran a quiet book on the outcome. On the 3rd day, the assessors issued a ruling of 9 lines, and the 9 lines detonated under the College of Envoys like a charge laid against a load-bearing wall. 31 of the writings, the court found, were genuinely deliberative instruments of governance, irrelevant to the petition, and would remain sealed. The remaining 12 touched the matter complained of directly. They would be unsealed to the parties, admitted to the record, and the 9th line, the line that emptied the chancery bars mid-meal, they appear to be incomplete as a class. The college will state on the record what a gray slip is. Cyril read the ruling standing in her doorway, with Bryn reading over her shoulder in violation of every protocol of chambers. And it was Bryn said it first in his ledger clerk's whisper. There's a whole second drawer. The college's statement, extracted over Audron's layered and exhausted objections at the next sitting, entered the record in the flat voice of a junior secretary and changed the temperature of the case forever. A gray slip was an instrument of internal counsel, a flimsy of unbleached gray stock, half a page, on which officers of the college had, by custom older than living memory, exchanged candid views on sensitive matters. By the same custom, gray slips bore no file number, entered no index, and were burned by the recipient after reading. What is not indexed is not produced, ran the maxim of the registry. What is burned is not even a ghost. The 12 unsealed writings reference gray slips the way scorched ground references fire, replies to slips, slips herewith returned, in the matter raised by your gray of the 9th. The college had built, inside its own walls, a complete second correspondence designed from its stock upward to be undiscoverable, and the court's open drawer had just produced the ash. They will say the slips are gone, June said that night in the storeroom, over the 12 unsealed writings laid out on the cot in her exact grid, burned by custom, nothing left to produce. They will, Cyril said, and it might even be true. And if it is true, we lose the words themselves and keep only the scorch marks, and scorch marks may not carry a judgment. She looked at the grid of writings, each one a college officer carefully not saying something, unless the custom had an exception. It was past midnight when the knock came, not at the chambers, where a knock could be seen, but at the consular annex's freight door, where a knock was just the ring settling. The visitor stood in the unloading bay with his hood up and his breathing fast, a slight gray Tellurite barely older than Bren, and he would not give his name for an hour. And when he finally gave it, June wrote it at the top of a fresh page in her level hand and underlined nothing, because underlining was for things that might be forgotten. Pel Aov, 4th Registrar of the College of Envoys, 11 years old when his clan had pooled passage fare to send him to the ring, first of his line to hold a sealed post. He sat on a freight crate with his hands wrapped around the T-Bren made him, and he talked to the floor, and what he told the floor was this. The gray slips were burned. That part of the custom held, mostly. But the custom had a keeper, and the keeper had a vice, and the vice was the institution's own vanity. because 3 centuries of college officers had been unable to bear the thought of their candor dying entirely. There had grown up, in the deep registry, a practice the juniors called the cold drawer. Before a slip went to its recipient, the registry sealed it in transit, and the seal office, by a procedure nobody had written down and everybody observed, pressed not one impression but two, one on the slip which burned with it, one in the seal books, which burned never, and beside the second impression in the seal clerk's shorthand 4 words of summary: sender, recipient, subject, tenor. 300 years of burned candor, reduced to 4 words of slip, sleeping in the seal books of the deep registry, because an institution that worshipped its own record-keeping could not make itself keep nothing. The seal books aren't college writings, Peleoff told the floor. That's what the registry tells itself. They belong to the seal office. The seal office is chartered separately. It's older than the college. It got folded in at the founding, but its books were never merged. They're not in the index because they're not ours to index. He looked up for the first time at June Sarrett sitting motionless on her cot. You were kind to me once. You won't remember. My first cycle, I missealed a V3 credential and it would have been my post, and you caught it in the corridor and walked it back to my desk, folded in a lane schedule, so no one saw. You said paper should protect people. He drank the cold tea. The slips about you are burned, Envoy. The 4-word summaries aren't. I've seen the book. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then June said, level as ever, if you testify to the cold drawer, they'll know within the hour it was you. Yes, they'll have your post. They'll have your name off the registry rolls. It's everything your clan bought. Yes, Peleoff said to the floor again. And then, with the terrible simple arithmetic of the young, but you're the proof of what they do to a name when nobody checks. Somebody checked mine once. He stood and wrapped his coat, and at the freight door he stopped and said the only bitter thing he would ever say in the entire proceeding. They made us burn the truth and keep the receipts. Let them explain the receipts. The subpoena for the seal books of the deep registry went up to the court of the charter 2 days later, and the college's answer came down with a speed that told Cyril the blow had landed in bone. For the first time since the petition was filed, Violodrun asked for a closed sitting. The assessors refused. Crail's order was one sentence. The founders built this room with 60 seats. The court declines to believe they meant them empty, and so it was an open session, before 60 packed observer seats in a corridor crowd 4 deep, that the College of Envoys stood up and argued, through the finest advocate of his generation, that its own seal books did not exist as a matter of law. Cyril let him build it, separate charter, unmerged custody, books of the seal office and not writings of the college, and when he sat down she rose with one document, because 30 years of pensions and freight had taught her exactly one art to mastery, and the art was provenance. The seal office, she said, draws its operating stock, paper, wax, lamp oil, and ink, from the general stores of the college, under requisition forms I now hand up, signed by college quartermasters for 300 years. Its clerks are paid on the college payroll, Schedule 11, which I hand up. Its books are bound by the college bindery. The bindery stamps its work. Assessors, you will find the stamp inside each rear cover. And when the deep registry flooded in the year of the coolant failure, the restoration of water-damaged seal books was paid for out of the college's own maintenance fund, line 40, which I hand up. She set the requisitions on the horseshoe table and squared them, and only those who knew her could have heard the freight and pensions advocate, permitting herself, syllable by syllable, the speech of a long-prepared gun. My learned colleague asks the court to find that the college does not own the seal books. The college has been buying their paper, paying their keepers, binding their spines, and drying their pages for 3 centuries. If the books are not the college's writings, then the college has been the victim of a continuous 300-year burglary conducted at its own expense, and I would gently suggest that somebody ought to have noticed. Dren Kavoth made a sound that the record entered as the assessor was taken briefly unwell, and that everyone in the room heard plainly as a bark of amphibious laughter. The seal books came up from the deep registry under guard, 11 volumes spanning the relevant years, bound in gray hide, smelling of wax and cold, and with them, blinking in the light of the chamber of the first sitting like something excavated, came their keeper. Anduraim, keeper of seals, fourth of that title, an Ulswader ancient so old that his species translator register had to be specially recalibrated, who had pressed seals in the dark of the deep registry for 90 years and outlasted 6 first wardens, and who, it became immediately clear, feared precisely nothing in the chamber because everything in the chamber was, from his vantage, recent. Adrian objected to the books, volume by volume. He objected to their custody, their authentication, their relevance, their legibility. He raised, in the end, the college's last and realist argument that the forward summaries were hearsay of burned originals, The seal clerk's impressions of writings the court could never read, and the old keeper listened to it all from the witness chair with his heavy eyes half shut, and when the assessors finally turned to him, he said, "The clerk does not summarize. The clerk copies the slip's own subject line and the sender's own tenor mark. The words in my books are the officer's words in the officer's order. I have pressed 12,000 slips, and I have invented nothing in 90 years, because invention, and here the recalibrated translator caught, for just a moment, something vast and cold and entirely sincere, is for people who will not be remembered by their work." The books were admitted. The sitting adjourned, and that night, while Bren copied the relevant pages by lamplight under the court clerk's supervision, Cyril Ahn finally read, in 4-word increments, in the seal clerk's shorthand, the skeleton of the conspiracy that had eaten her client's name. Second week of coring, 9 days before any offense existed, warden to registrar VAM, human question roles resolve, same week. VAM to warden, cause required which preferred. The same day the answer that had been burned but not killed. Warden to VAM, decision first cause clerical. Decision first cause clerical. Cyril sat with the copied page in her hands until the lamp burned down, and across the desk June Sarrett looked at the 4 words that had been the whole of her destruction. The decision precedes the cause. Causes are clerical, and said nothing at all for a long time, and then said the thing that Cyril would put, almost unchanged, at the center of her argument months later. They wrote it down, June said. Even when they built a paper made of fire, even when they burned every word by custom, they still had to write it down. People like this always write it down, because the writing is how they prove to each other they had the right. She set the page on the desk, squared it. Then we'll do it with their writing. All of it, advocate. I don't want a settlement, and I don't want a summary. I want the authors. The authors, Cyril repeated. The slips behind those 4-word entries, the long ones, the ones in the 12 writings, the replies that never burned, the decorum circulars, the cause file built backward, certificate of completeness with 43 holes in it. The banked fire was fully lit now, and it was not rage. Cyril had watched for rage for months and was beginning to understand it would never come. It was something far more dangerous to an institution, precision. There's a rule, you told me the first week, the founder's shame rule. If a writing is contested, the party may demand that it be read into the record by its living author, Cyril said. The reading of authors. It hasn't been invoked in 200 years. Neither had Article 9, said June Sarrett. Invoke it. Make them read what they wrote about me. Out loud in the founder's room, with the doors open, every author, starting from the bottom. She looked up, and on her face was the stillness of the very first day, banked and level and absolutely without mercy. I'll sit where they can see me while they do it. The price of the motion was tendered before the motion was even heard, and it was tendered, as the largest prices are, over tea. Guild Elder Savick Morn had given Cyril Ahn her first brief 40 years ago, when she was a clerk with ink on her breath valves and no name worth licensing. He had stood for her at her charter oath. He kept in his chambers on the second gallery a tea service 3 centuries old, and to be poured from it was the highest honor the Murek Advocates Guild informally possessed, and Cyril had been poured from it exactly twice in her life. The third time she understood before the cup was full that it was a price list. You have done a remarkable thing, Morn said, pouring. I want you to hear that from me before you hear the rest. 40 years, and you have argued the finest provenance point I have ever seen stand up in a chamber. Raval was clever. This is craft. He set the pot down with ritual care. Now let me tell you what it is buying. The licensing review into your conduct convenes on the 4th of threshing. I have seen the panel list. You will not like it. The guild has been asked Cyril, in the way the college asks, which is the way weather asks a roof, to consider whether an advocate who sues, the source of all licenses, can be said to be in good standing with the institution of licensing as such. Do you hear the shape of that question? It has no answer. It is not meant to have one. It is meant to be considered at length expensively until the considering is the punishment. The 4th of threshing, Cyril said, is the second week of the trial of the petition. Yes, Morn said. It is, isn't it? He turned his cup a quarter turn, an old male's economy of fury, and she realized with a small shock that the fury was not aimed at her. I argued against the date. I was outvoted by colleagues who have evolved needs, so you will ask for a continuance of the review, which will be denied, and then you will face a choice between your client's trial and your own, on the same mornings, 4 galleries apart, unless, of course, the petition were to resolve before threshing, in which case I am assured, by people whose assurances are normally bankable, that the review would discover it had been scheduled in error. He looked at her over the ancient cup. I am not advising you to abandon your client. I am required by certain undertakings to describe the door they have built for you. I have now described it. And if I don't walk through it, Savik Morn was silent for a moment, and when he spoke again, the guild was gone from his voice, and only the old advocate was left. Then, on the 4th of threshing, he said an year-old colleague with nothing left to license will appear before the conduct panel as your counsel of record, and we will discover together whether I remember how to be unpleasant. He refilled her cup, and the audience and the alliance were concluded. Your client, is she worth it? I've only seen her once. She holds herself like a closed instrument. She reads everything, Cyril said. She checks everything. She is the only being I have met in 40 years who actually believes what we put on the oaths. She set down the honor. The college struck her for it, so yes, Elder, she is worth it. She is the practice. Everything else I have done was the fee. They came for Bren the same week, not with menace, which would have failed loudly, but with a future which nearly succeeded quietly. A sealed letter offering the clerk of the infamous On Chambers a registry apprenticeship with the college itself. Full sponsorship, clan passage paid, a sealed post inside 3 years. Every door his species poverty had ever closed, opened by one signature, provided only that the apprenticeship began at once before the trial. Bren brought the letter to Cyril unopened. He had recognized the seal and refused, on principle, to give them the satisfaction of his eyes on the terms, and asked her, with the offended formality of the young, to enter it in evidence as an attempted purchase of an officer of the proceedings. The assessors declined to receive it as evidence. Crail read it, though, in open session, his stare traveling from the college's table to the document and back like a sentence being passed, and then handed it down with a single dry observation that entered the record, and within a day, every chancery bar on the ring. The court observes that the college's apprenticeships have become remarkably competitive. What was done to June Sarrett in those same weeks was smaller, pettier, and to Cyril's eye more instructive, because none of it required orders from anyone. The institution did it by reflex, the way a body fights a splinter. The plaque in the Lanes Bureau atrium honoring the Vensing corridor relief, the famine convoy her waiver had saved, was re-engraved during routine, maintenance with the certifying officer's name removed for reasons of space. Her stipend, restored on paper by the stay, was recalculated, then re-audited, then suspended pending the re-audit of the recalculation. Gray slips of a humbler kind began appearing under the consular annex's freight door at night, unsigned in several scripts. Go home, Mayfly. The rolls are not a ladder. Count your days, they are short enough. June entered each one into the case ledger herself, dated, with the notation anonymous exhibit, and kept reading. And against all of it, unbidden, the other thing kept happening, the thing the college had not priced and could not stop, because it moved through the same corridors their pressure did, one being at a time. The Yendri envoy's string bag of eating moss was followed by a Vethri trade clerk who sat down across from June in the commissary, said nothing, and ate her entire meal there visibly, in company, which among Vethri was a contract. A retired translator sent a box of candle stubs with a note. For the storeroom, I also read everything. The morning after the plaque was re-engraved, someone, the Bureau never found whom, etched into the alloy beside the official text, in small neat lane cipher that every working pilot on the ring could read and no college officer could, 4 words. The certifying officer counted. The motion came on for hearing on the first day of threshing, and Vel Odrun fought the reading of authors as if the college's life depended on it, because by then everyone in the chamber of the first sitting understood that it did. He argued antiquity again. The reading was Founder's Theater, a shame right from an age of 11 worlds in one room. He argued cruelty, that the petitioners sought not evidence but spectacle, the public humiliation of college officers, punishment before judgment. He argued, in a long afternoon of genuine and formidable advocacy, that the words of a writing were the same from any mouth, that the record needed the text and not the voice, that nothing would be added to the court's knowledge by compelling authors to perform their own documents, and Cyril stood up into the silence he left and put the founder's answer on the table. My learned colleague is correct that the text is the same from any mouth, she said. The founders knew it too. They were not collecting texts. Assessors. The right is in the charter's own hand, and the founders wrote one sentence of reasons beneath it, and I asked the court's leave to read the sentence. Crail nodded. Cyril lifted the charter facsimile and read, For we have found that a being may sign what it cannot say, and the accord shall not be governed by anything its officers cannot say. She lowered the page. The college's officers wrote these things about a servant of the accord, she said. The petitioner does not ask that they be shamed. She asks that they be audible. If the writings are as innocent as the college certifies, then its authors will read them aloud and be vindicated by their own voices, and my client will have handed them the finest stage in the accord on which to be innocent. The motion only has teeth if the words are unsayable. She turned deliberately to the college's table for the last sentence, and delivered it in Freight and Pension's deadpan. And if the words are unsayable, counselor, the court is entitled to wonder why your client signed them. The assessors granted the reading of authors that evening, 2 voices to none, Cavith concurring separately in a single line that the chancery bars would print on drinking cloths before the week was out. The drawer is open. The college will now meet what it kept in it. The counterattack, when it finally came in the open, did not come through the court at all, because the court had stopped being losable ground. It came through the assembly, which was the oldest move in the oldest book. If the rules are beating you, vote on the rules. 3 days before trial, the delegation of the Brell Combine laid a motion before the full assembly of the Accord, a charter housekeeping measure, drafted in the gray dialect of procedure, to refer Article 9 to a commission of modernization, its operation suspended naturally while the commission sat, and commissions of the Accord had been known to sit for 40 years. The motion was seconded within a minute by 4 polities that carried combine debt, and the chancery bars, which had stopped taking money on the verdict, opened a new book overnight on whether the case of Surratt against the college would simply be legislated out from under the assessors before a single author read a single word. Cyril could do nothing about it, and the helplessness was instructive. She was an advocate. The assembly was not a court, and there was no rail in Vance Hall for her to stand at. She sat in the public gallery on the day of the vote with Bren on one side and her client on the other, June watching the floor the way she watched everything, and what they witnessed from the gallery was the thing the college and the combine, in 3 centuries of pricing every lever on the ring, had never once thought to price. The small worlds stood up, not the powers. The powers abstained, hedging, reading the weather. It was the margins of the chamber that moved, single-system polities, breakaway leagues, agricultural compacts whose entire presence in the Accord was 1 envoy and 1 desk. A fisheries delegate from a world of 11 million rose first and asked, with no rhetoric at all, a question of the chair: whether the proposed commission would have suspended Article 9 2 years ago, when the strike was read, and whether the honorable mover could explain to the smaller members what protection any of their envoys would enjoy the day a cartel found one of them inconvenient in the 40 years before the commission reported. Then a mining compact's envoy read aloud, without comment, the 4 words of the sealbook, decision first, cause clerical, and asked the chamber to consider whose names got resolved that way when clauses slept. Then a Yendri delegate, very old, who had said nothing on the floor in a decade, reminded the assembly that her republic had joined an accord of open registers, not a clearinghouse with a furnace, and that small worlds had long memories. It was, she said, practically the only infrastructure they could afford. The motion's whips had counted on a drowsy chamber and gotten a town meeting. By the time the question was called, 11 co-sponsors had become 4, the 4 had become the combine alone, and the modernization of Article 9 failed by a margin the relays described as instructive, with the abstaining powers in the final minute, voting no in a body, because the only thing a hedging power fears more than a strong cartel is a visible loss, standing next to one. June Surratt watched the tally post and said, in the gallery to no one in particular, they keep assuming nobody reads. They built the whole drawer on it, Cyril said. The trial of the petition began on the 4th of threshing, the same morning, 4 galleries away, that the conduct review of Advocate Cyril On was gavelled open in an empty room, continued in her absence for precisely 11 minutes, and adjourned to a date to be determined in front of one witness, Gilder Savik Morn, counsel of record, who rose at the adjournment and thanked the panel on the record for an error of scheduling so eloquent that he intended to cite it. In the chamber of the first sitting there were 60 seats and 400 bodies, and the corridor beyond the doors had been fitted with sound relays by order of the court, the founder's acoustics being equal to 60 and not to the Accord. June Surratt sat at the petitioner's table in her envoy's charcoal, the strike order squared in front of her, in the direct sight line of the witness chair. She had asked Cyril to arrange the tables for exactly that geometry, and the first author was called, a little after the morning bell, Secretary Lowell Marn, of the Office of the Registrar of the Rolls, a small dray of middle years who had signed the scheduling instrument for the decorum review of Envoy Surratt. The instrument was placed in her hands. She was asked by the court to read it aloud. It was 4 sentences long. The first 3 were administrative boilerplate, and she read them in an administrator's voice, quick and colorless, and Cyril watched her arrive at the 4th sentence, watched her eyes reach it. Before her voice did, watched the exact moment the author remembered what the author had written, and the chamber heard the voice change pitch in the middle of her own words, like a vehicle dropping a gear on a hill. Schedule the review for the 3rd week of coring, read Lowell Marn before the gallery, and she stopped, and the room waited. and the bell-clear silence of the founder's acoustics held her, and she finished very quietly, before the gallery loses its appetite for the human question. The third week of coring, Cyril said, when the document had been entered. Secretary, the offenses for which the petitioner was eventually struck, on what date is the earliest of them alleged to have occurred? A long pause. The fourth week of coring. So the review of her conduct was scheduled before the conduct. Cyril did not raise her voice. The room's 3th-century acoustics carried 30 years of freight council flatness to the corridor relays, and its date was chosen to suit the gallery's appetite. Whose phrase is that, Secretary? The gallery's appetite. Yours? Lol Marn looked at the instrument in her hands as if it had arrived there by accident. When she answered, the answer was nearly inaudible, and the relays carried it anyway, out the doors, down the corridor, into the ring. It was the phrase in the slip, she said. I was answering a gray slip. We always matched our language to the slips. It was courteous, Cyril said. To whom the sender? And the sender of that slip, Secretary. The pause this time was the longest yet, and into it, before the answer came, fell a small sound from the assessor's table. Mel Sora, 50 years of bills of lading behind her, turning to the first page of her notes and writing one word at the top, unhurried, in plain view of the college's 6 advocates, like a cargo clerk opening a claim. The first warden, said Lulmarn. The slips came from the office of First Warden Thest. The college's case, such as it was, rested on the 3 counts, and so before the siege could go higher it had to go through them, and the counts came apart in open session the way wet paper comes apart. Not dramatically, just continuously, fiber by fiber, until there was nothing in the hands. Count the first was the Lane certificate, that Envoy Sarrett had falsified an emergency waiver to push 14-grain hulls through the Vessing corridor, while the corridor stood closed by a Brel Combine quarantine declaration. The college put the certificate on the table. Cyril put the convoy on the stand. The convoy master was a human named Esper Odell, broad and slow-spoken, burned dark by other system sons, and she testified the way humans of her trade apparently did everything, without decoration. Halvern Thursh, she told the court, had been eating its seed stock for a season. The Combine's quarantine had been declared against a blight that its own inspectors had never managed to produce a sample of, but which happened to apply to every lane that bypassed Combine tariff stations. 14 hulls of grain had sat at the corridor mouth for 19 days, fees accruing, while 200,000 people on Halverna 3 went from hungry to starving, and every authority in reach had expressed sympathy and declined jurisdiction. Then the liaison office sent us a junior envoy, Esper Odell said. I expected a speech. Got a person with a docket case instead. She sat in my wardroom for 6 hours reading lane law, and then she found it. Found what? Cyril asked. Article of the lanes, humanitarian transit, old as the Accord. A quarantine can close a lane to commerce, but no declaration of any member closes a lane to relief. Relief moves under Accord seal if a certifying officer of the Accord will put their name on the cargo. Any certifying officer. The convoy master's gaze moved, slow and deliberate, to the petitioner's table. I asked her if she understood what the Combine would do to whoever signed. She said the rule was old and the children were hungry, and the second thing couldn't wait for the first thing to be popular. Then she signed her name 14 times, once per hull, and we flew. Was the cargo relief. Grain. Every gram. Their own inspectors boarded us at the far mouth hoping otherwise. And the certificate the college calls falsified, what does it certify? That the cargo was relief, said Esper Odell. And the cargo was relief. They've had it in their hands 2 years. You'll notice nobody's ever said which word of it is false. The word they mean is the signature, and the thing wrong with the signature is who it belongs to. Count the second, the breach of the closed session, survived its own examination by 11 minutes. The session June Sarrett was struck for breaching was a Rolls Committee meeting whose minutes, produced from the 12 unsealed writings, over objection, showed in their own attendance table that she had been summoned to it by the committee itself to answer questions about the Vessing waiver. The breach consisted in its entirety of her having attended where summoned and answered what was asked. Odron, to his professional credit, did not seriously defend it. Cyril entered the summons and the minutes side by side, invited the assessors to compare them at leisure, and sat down without a question. Count the third, misuse of the college seal, was the one the college should never have written, because it brought the seal books into open court, and the seal books brought Andu Raim back to the witness chair, and Andu Raim brought 90 years of the deep registry with him and no fear of anything recent. The count alleged that Envoy Sarrett had applied a college seal to the waiver without authority. The keeper of seals was asked by the college's own counsel to confirm from his books that no seal grant had issued to the petitioner for that purpose. The old Olswaiter turned his pages with hands the color of riverbed, found the relevant volume and week, and read out, in his recalibrated base, a seal grant issued to the liaison office, transitive relief class, valid for the month of coring, and bearing, he held the book up, open, toward the horseshoe table, the counter-impression of the office of the Registrar of the Rolls. "The grant exists?" Audruns Jr. asked, into a stillness that had gone wrong for him. "The grant exists," said Andurame. "I pressed it myself. The Registrar's office counter-sealed it on the 9th of coring. The Envoy's use was lawful to the letter. I would add," and the college's junior, sensing the cliff, tried to thank the witness and sit him down, but the Keeper of Seals had pressed 12,000 slips in the dark and outlasted 6 wardens and was not finishable by a junior. "I would add that on the 12th of the following month, my deputy received a request from the Office of the Registrar to locate that grants page for review. The page was reviewed. The page is the one I am holding. The Registrar's office has known the grant existed for 2 years. It is pasted, by their own request marker, 3 pages from the front of the volume they swore they had searched." At the assessor's table, Dren Kavoth leaned forward, said, "Hand it up," and read the page himself, and the chamber's relays carried out into the corridor. For the second time that season, the small, dry sound of an institution's own record-keeping closing on its hand like a drawer. They put Registrar Coleth Vam in the witness chair on the 9th day of trial, and Cyril took him through the arithmetic of the docket number with the slow courtesy she reserved for load-bearing witnesses. He had answers. They had built him answers. Cyril could hear the careful joinery of advocates in everyone. The cause file's impossible number was a renumbering artifact. Files were occasionally reshelved into vacant integers from canceled matters. The registry's conventions were complex. The gentle lady from the freight bar could not be expected to grasp the deep registry's customs. He said the word customs with the faintest emphasis, a small institutional sneer, and Cyril let it lie on the record for a moment before she fed it back to him. "Customs," she said. "Then let us use the registry's own customs. When a canceled integer is reassigned, Registrar, your conventions require a cross-entry in the cancellation table. I hold the cancellation table for the relevant series, certified by your office under the discovery order. Show the court the cross-entry for the petitioner's cause file." Vam looked at the table for a long time. "The cross-entry does not appear to have been made. Then by the registry's own conventions, the number was not reassigned, and the file was opened in sequence, in the second week of coring, 9 days before the offense it documents, unless the registry's conventions are themselves customary, at which point, Registrar, I will ask the Keeper of Seals to step back in, and we can spend the afternoon discovering how many of your conventions hold only when nobody checks." "The file," Vam said, and stopped, and the chamber's 3th-century acoustics held him the way they had held Lulmarn, the way they were built to hold beings who had signed what they could not say. The strike order this man had read aloud to 190 worlds lay on the petitioner's table in his direct sightline, squared to the edge, with its author's signature face up. "The file was opened when I was instructed to open it," he said at last. "Instructed by whom?" "By a gray slip from the office of the first warden." "With what instruction, Registrar?" "The court has the seal book's 4 words, cause required, which preferred." "Your words going back. What was the slip you were answering?" I was asked. Vam's gray hands moved on the rail. "Found nothing to hold. Settled. I was asked to determine which of several available causes would be most durable for the resolution of the human question on the rolls." "Available," Cyril said. "Available causes." "The offense had not happened yet, Registrar." "What is an available cause for an offense that has not happened?" And Coleth Vam, Registrar of the Rolls of Standing of the Tessin Accord, 31 years in office, looked across the founder's room at the small human woman whose name he had lined through, and gave the answer that would follow him off the ring and out of public life. One that can be assembled. He resigned his office before the next morning's bell. The college announced it as a retirement, long contemplated. Nobody on Cauldrell Ring troubled to pretend to believe it, and the Chancery bars, which had been running their book on the verdict at even odds the week the trial opened, quietly stopped taking new money. The college answered the only way it had left, which was off the record. Cyril came back to the 9th gallery that night to find her chamber's outer door standing open and the file room turned over, not robbed, sorted. Whoever had come had worked in gloves and order, crate by crate, and taken nothing she could name, which was the point. The next motion the college filed accused the petitioner's counsel of withholding discoverable material and invited the court to order an inspection of her chambers. And the inspection would have found whatever the gloves had left behind to be found. It was a good trap, professionally built. It failed for one reason, and the reason was 18 years old and slept badly. Bren Ottle, who since the apprenticeship letter had taken to keeping the case ledger on his person at all times, including the duplicate inventory of every crate Page sealed weekly before a lane notary, a precaution Cyril had never ordered and would not have thought of. The inventory was produced. The planted folio appeared on no sealed page. The college's motion died in an afternoon, and Assessor Prime Crail, denying it, used 4 sentences, of which the last was, "The court has begun to notice a pattern in what this institution finds when it searches itself." Pelayoff testified in the 3rd week, last of the registry witnesses, and paid on the way to the chair exactly what he had priced in the freight bay. The college, with viperish timing, terminated his post that same morning, a restructuring of the 4th registrarship, so that he would take the stand not as an officer of the registry but as a dismissed clerk, impeachable, disgruntled, small. He took it anyway. He testified to the cold drawer, to the unwritten procedure and the double impression, to the registry's maxim, "What is not indexed is not produced," and he answered Audron's careful cross, which suggested in 7 mannerly ways that a Sack Jr. might invent anything by reaching into his coat for the one thing no one in the chamber knew existed. "You're right that I have no post," he said, "and no standing, and no clan name now worth the registry's ink. So I brought my work instead. This is the seal office duplicate of my own induction oath, 11 years old. The registry made me burn the original, custom of the office. The oath belongs to the office, not the clerk. But the cold drawer kept its copy the way it keeps everything, the way it kept hers." He laid the gray page on the rail. "They taught me the system themselves, assessors. They just never imagined it would be used in this direction." When he stepped down, there was no demonstration. The chamber of the first sitting did not permit them, and the court would have cleared the room, but the 400 bodies in the 60 seats accorded the sacked clerk a thing Cyril had never seen a chamber do. They stood, in silence, in ones and twos, and then wholly, while he walked the length of the founder's floor to the doors, and the college's 6 advocates examined their own table, and June Sarrett, who had testified to nothing yet and sat squarer than any of them, rose last and held the door. The string bag of eating moss had come with a slip of paper, in the first hard month, in a shaking formal hand. "My niece was struck in 61 for cause. We signed their offer. The cause was false. Hold." June had folded it into the document case and held, and in the 4th week of trial, the slip of paper came back out of the case and into the record, because the petition had one more thing to prove, and the thing was the word again. The niece was named Shella Venny, and finding her took Bren 11 days of registry archaeology, because beings erased by the college did not stay findable. Struck in 61, 29 years old at the time, the Yendri Republic's brightest credentialing prospect in a generation, gone from the rolls between 2 freight schedules on a cause of irregular at a station that no one had ever publicly examined, because her family, small world people, proud, terrified of the fees, had signed the quiet offer in 19 days. She had gone home. She taught lane law now at a provincial academy on an ice moon, to pilots' children, and when the relay request for her deposition reached her, she was silent on the link for so long that Bren thought the channel had failed, and then she said, 22 years. I had stopped expecting anyone to check. The college fought her deposition as irrelevant, a settled matter sealed by consent, another era. Crail admitted it in 4 words. Pattern is never irrelevant, and so by relay under oath, her image standing in the founder's room like a visitor from the case's own future, Selzaveni testified to the anatomy of her erasure, and the chamber heard, point by point, the same skeleton they had spent a season excavating. The cause file, whose docket number ran weeks ahead of its cause, the decorum review scheduled before the conduct, the offer of her own name back, sealed no admissions, priced precisely at what a small family could not refuse. Anduraim recalled briefly to the chair, turned the seal book of 61 to the flagged week, and read the forward entries into the record in his riverbed base, and the relays carried them out to 190 worlds. Attestation matter resolved quietly. And, 2 entries later, in the same departing backward-leaning hand the court now knew on sight. Avener Thest had been second warden then, a rising officer, learning the custom he would one day administer. Decision holds, paper to follow. 22 years between the 2 strikes, and the grammar had not changed by a syllable. They will say 2 cases are a coincidence, Cyril told the assessors, entering the certified pages. The petitioner invites the college to say so on the record, and then to explain why the court should not order the seal books opened for every strike of the last 3 centuries and count. The college did not say so on the record. The college, by its counsel, declined the invitation in a single sentence, and Valadron's face as he delivered it suggested a man declining on instructions with a number already in his mind, and the number was not small. When the relay link closed, Shelaveni asked the court's leave to say one thing, not an answer to any question, and Crail, who refused such requests as a rule of 9 decades standing, allowed it. They gave me back my name in 19 days, she said, and I signed, and I have spent 22 years believing the signing was the mistake. It wasn't. We were alone. You do what the alone can do. The mistake was theirs. The same one every time, the one in their own 4 words. They keep deciding first. Her image looked across the founder's room to the petitioner's table to the small human sitting level beside her advocate. Decide first, Envoy. It works in this direction too. She took the witness chair herself on the 17th day because the petition was hers and the court was entitled to her, and because she had said it to Cyril flatly the night before in the storeroom. An envoy who would not answer questions in the open had no business suing other people for things written in the dark. Cyril's examination took 11 minutes. It consisted in its entirety of the record, the waiver, the summons, the seal grant, the strike order, each placed in her client's hands in turn with the same 2 questions. Is this the document? Is your signature true? And the same 2 answers. Yes and yes. She had planned it that way for a month. The college had built 2 years of paper, calling this woman excessive, volatile, unsuited to the gravity of the roles. Cyril did not intend to argue with the paper. She intended to stand the woman next to it and let the assessors do their own arithmetic. Then she sat down and gave her client to Vel Odron, and the chamber leaned forward, and Cyril's breath valves went tight, because this, everyone in the 60 seats and the corridor beyond knew it, was the college's last position. The counts were rubble. The registry had collapsed. All Audron had left was the witness, make the human large, make her hot, make her mayfly. One flash of temper in the founder's acoustics would be worth more to the college than every motion it had filed. He was very, very good. He began gently. Her youth, her 4 years against colleagues 40, the great age of the institution she presumed to read law to. He praised the famine waiver, warmly and at length, and then asked whether saving 200,000 lives had felt powerful, whether she had enjoyed it, whether a junior envoy might come to crave that feeling and go looking for it, and find rules in old books the way other species found intoxicants. He asked about the gallery crowds, the standing clerk, the etched cipher in the bureau atrium. Celebrated, was she not? A symbol now? Was the petition for her name or for the audience? He suggested with surgical regret that her composure itself was the proof of the charge, that ordinary beings wept or raged when ruined, and the ones who sat level as instruments were the ones running calculations. He worked her stillness from every side of it for 2 hours, looking for the seam, and the relays carried every answer out into the ring. Did you understand, when Yup signed the waiver, that you were embarrassing the Brel Combine? I understood I was certifying grain. You felt nothing for the institution you were defying. The institution wasn't hungry. You sit very calmly, Envoy, for a being whose name and livelihood hang on this court. I sat calmly while you struck me, counselor. It would be strange to stop now. Is there anything the college could have offered you that would have ended this petition? Yes. The truth, in the open. It was never offered. And at the end of the 2 hours, with nothing in his hands, Vel Odron paused over his interior ledger one last time and chose, because there was nothing else left on the page, the bottom of it. You are aware, he said, what some of my clients' officers privately call your species, mayflies, provisional. You have read worse than that in this proceeding, in the college's own slips, and we are all of us aware there is worse yet under seal. I ask you plainly, Envoy, in the founder's room, and the court will want the truth of it. When you read those words about your kind, and here he spread his silver hands, offering her the trap as openly as a gift, rage, or perjury, whichever she preferred, what did you feel? June Sarrett looked at him for a moment. 60 seats and a corridor and 190 worlds worth of relays waited with him for the mayfly temper. Recognition, she said. Odron blinked. Recognition? I've been reading the college's paper for 2 years, counselor. By now I know the authors better than they know themselves. They put everything down in writing, even the things they burn. So when I read what they call my kind, I don't feel what you're hoping I feel. I just recognize the hand. She turned, unhurried, and looked at the college's table, and the level voice never moved a degree. Men who were certain the drawer would stay shut, certain the clause was dead, certain that nobody who mattered would ever check. I'm not the one in this room who runs on feeling, counselor. I checked. Vel Odron stood quite still for a moment. Then he closed his folder, and the click of it carried in the founder's acoustics like a bell. No further questions, he said. And the college thanks the witness for her courtesy. The record should reflect that it was not owed. It was the first honest sentence his client had purchased in 2 years, and Cyril, watching the silver advocate sit down, understood that something inside the man had finished changing sides several days earlier, and that the college's last position had just declined to fire. What remained was the top of the paper mountain, and everyone knew its name by now, the circular. Concerning the human question on the rolls, authored in the second week of coring by First Warden Avener Thest, Distributed by gray slip to the wardens of section referenced, herewith returned, in the matter raised by your circular, in 5 of the 12 unsealed writings. Summarized in the seal books in 4 words that the entire ring could recite, decision first, cause clerical. The college's position was simple and final. The circular was burned. All copies by custom in the recipient's own lamps. The court could have its ash and its forward ghost, but the words themselves were gone from the universe, and no right of the founders could compel a man to read a document that did not exist. It was Bren, 18 years old, keeper of duplicate inventories, reader of sweepings, who broke it in the small hours with the seal books open on one knee and the college's maintenance ledger on the other. Advocate, he said, the binding request. Undo Rame's testimony, weeks before, in the matter of provenance. When the deep registry flooded in the year of the coolant failure, water damage volumes had gone to the college bindery for restoration, paid from maintenance line 40. Bren had pulled line 40 out of professional thoroughness, and line 40, in the season after the strike of June Sarrett, recorded one item out of place among the registry's volumes, rebinding and recasing, one letter book, office of the first warden, gray hide, lock spine. A letter book, Cyril said slowly. A lock spine letter book is a vanity binding, Bren said. Estate registers, lineage rolls. Things meant to outlive their authors. The warden's office sent one to the bindery for recasing 2 years ago, which means the warden's office keeps one, which means the custom of burning has an exception, and the exception is the man at the top of it. The slips burn advocate. His copies don't. He has them entered. He keeps his own correspondence the way emperors keep annals. Bren looked up, pale and certain. She said it the first month. People like this always write it down, because the writing is how they prove to each other they had the right. He couldn't burn his own proof. It's his monument. The motion to compel the letter book of the first warden was filed at Lamprise, heard in 3 days, and fought by the college with a desperation that abandoned at last all pretense of confidence. And midway through that hearing, with Undo Rame in the chair, confirming the rebinding, volume by date, in his riverbed base, Assessor Melsora did the thing that the seasoned watchers in the 60 seats would afterward call the true verdict, delivered early. She stopped the proceedings, asked the keeper to hand the bindery ledger up, put on her cargo arbitrator's lenses, and checked the entry herself, line by line, in open court, exactly the way the petitioner checked everything and then looked over the lenses at the college's table for a long freighted moment and said, "Continue." The order to produce issued the same evening. The college had one move left, and Cyril had been waiting for it since the tea service of Sabbath morn, and it arrived within the day, the second offer. It was magnificent. Reinstatement, restitution, public vacature of the strike with a published finding that the counts were unfounded, not improvident this time. Unfounded, cost paid. The conduct review of Advocate on the restructuring of Registrar Ayov's post discovered to be errors reversed, expunged, and the heart of it, the thing that told Cyril the institution had finally understood what it was bleeding, reform. The college would adopt by its own hand a standing rule of open cause, no strike without open hearing, the envoy present, the cause file published. Everything the petition could win at trial granted by consent tonight. One term in exchange. The letter book stayed sealed. The circular would never be read. Cyril carried it to the storeroom herself because counsel's duty was to carry it, and she laid it out fairly, more than fairly. She argued it, properly, as the college's advocate could not have, that this paper gave June her name, her seat, her vindication, and gave every envoy after her the open cause rule, that trials were dice, that no court could promise what this signature promised, that the difference between this settlement and total victory was one document read aloud by one old male, and that no rational measure of her client's interests put any weight at all on the sound of his voice. June Sarrett read all of it, twice, in the lamplight, between the towers of index chaff. Then she set it down, squared it to the cot's edge from old habit, and was quiet for a while. "Everything I asked for," she said at last. "Everything you could ask for me, they've priced it perfectly. They always price things perfectly. It's causes they assemble." She looked up. "Tell me what the rule is worth, Advocate, the day after they adopt it by consent. The open cause rule, granted as a favor, in a settlement bought to keep one circular sealed. The first envoy who stands up under that rule, some junior from some species the gallery has lost its appetite for, what does she hold? A rule the college gave, that the college can take, resting on a record with a hole in the middle where the reason was supposed to be. They're not buying my silence anymore. They know I'll sign any truth they'll publish. They're buying the whole. They want the record to show what they did and never show why, because the why is the thing that repeats." She handed the offer back. "If it stays sealed, it stays true. Somewhere in that building, in 30 years, a man like Thess writes the next circular, and the cold drawer keeps it, and nobody checks, because the last time it ended in a settlement and everyone was reasonable. No, the court has the book. Let the author read it. It will cost you the certainty, Cyril said. All of it. Dice from here. It cost 200,000 people on Halvern 3 19 days of fees to move grain through an open lane, June said, lying back, eyes closing, level as ever. Certainties expensive everywhere. Proceed. The Court of the Charter denied the college's final privilege claim at the next sitting. In the shortest ruling of the proceeding, the drawer stands open. It does not stand open except for monuments, and ordered that the circular, concerning the human question on the rolls, letterbook of the first warden, volume the 9th, be read into the record under the right of the reading of authors, by its living author. The sitting was set for the first morning of the following week, and for the only time in the entire siege, the College of Envoys made no filing, no offer, and no sound at all. The institution had run out of paper. All that was left was the voice. Governor Thest, first warden of the College of Envoys, had governed the rolls of standing for 26 years, and Cyril An had never once been in a room with him, because beings of her gallery did not get rooms with the first warden. She knew him the way the ring knew him, the tall, spare figure at the head of accession ceremonies, the backward-leaning signature on every credential in the accord, the voice, they said, that had talked 4 wars back into their harbors. He was, by every account she had ever heard, and most of the records she had read, a great servant of the Tessin Accord. That was the part the chancery bars kept getting wrong, she thought, watching the doors of the chamber of the first, sitting on the morning of the reading. They were waiting for a monster to walk in. Monsters would be easier. The case had never been about a monster. It was about a great servant of an institution who had decided, somewhere in 26 years of service, that the institution's comfort and the accord's good were the same object, and had then done what all such men did, which was administer the difference out of existence. He came in at the morning bell, in the plain gray of his office without insignia. Someone had advised him well. It did not help, and took the witness chair like a man taking a podium, and for a moment before the rite began, his eyes found the petitioner's table, where June Sarrett sat in her envoy's charcoal with her hands folded in the geometry she had asked for, the direct sightline, and the first warden of the College of Envoys looked at the human he had erased, and the human looked back, level, and it was Thest who turned first to the assessors and asked if the court was ready to proceed. The clerk of the court placed the letter book on the rail before him. Volume the 9th, gray-hide, lock-spine, opened to the flag page by the clerk's hand so that the author could not even perform the small dignity of finding it himself. The chamber of the first sitting held 400 bodies, and the corridor held 600 more, and the relays carried room to every gallery of Cauldron Ring, and the founder's acoustics, 3 centuries old, built to make 60 seats hear one voice, took the silence and held it up like a glass. The right is the founder's, Assessor Prime Crail said. The form is simple. The author reads the writing, whole aloud. The court does not interrupt. Begin when you are ready, First Warden, and not before. Thest looked at the page for a time. When he began, his voice was the ceremony voice, the credential voice, deep and even, and Cyril thought. He has decided to read it as a state paper. He thinks the register will carry it. He thinks gravity is a property of the voice and not of the words. And she watched him learn, clause by clause, in front of the accord, that the founders had known better, that the right worked precisely because no register in the galaxy could carry certain sentences once they had to travel through their author's own breath. Furcular, Office of the First Warden, second week of coring, to the Wardens of Section by gray hand, to be rendered after reading. Concerning the human question on the rolls, colleagues, I will be brief and I will be plain, because among ourselves we have earned plainness. The admission of humans to accreditation was an experiment forced on the college by treaty and weather. I opposed it then in these same gray pages. I record without satisfaction that the intervening years have vindicated the opposition. The question is not the competence of the specimens. Several are competent. One at least is exceptional, and the exceptional one is the emergency, for reasons I will set out. The rolls are not a register of skill. They are a register of trust, and trust among our kinds is the work of long lives, slow blood, and centuries of weighed precedent. The human term of service is august. They arrive, they learn the corridors faster than is decent, they bind loyalties they cannot live long enough to honor, and they leave behind them obligations payable by institutions to ghosts. A mayfly may be brilliant. The rolls were not written for mayfly tempers, and a brilliant mayfly is simply a larger error arriving sooner. But competence and tenure are the lesser matters. Here is the greater, and I ask you to read it twice, because it is the whole of my reasoning. A seal is worth what every seal beside it is worth. That is the entire architecture of the accord. We have no fleet worth the name and no treasury worth stealing. We have the rolls, and the rolls are believed because of who may not sign them. Every credential we have ever issued is a promise about exclusion. When the gallery worlds see a human seal beside a Tellurite seal beside a Dre seal, they do not conclude that humans have risen. They conclude that seals have fallen. A human seal devalues every seal beside it, not by its quality, which I concede, but by its company, which I cannot. This is not prejudice, colleagues. It is arithmetic about prejudice, performed by those whose duty is the ledger. I come to the remedy. There must be no expulsion of the class as such. Treaty forbids it, and clumsy instruments invite review. The remedy is attrition with a lesson in it. We will begin with the youngest. She has the fewest friends and the most future, and both points are load-bearing. The fewest friends, so the matter will be quiet. The most future, so the lesson will carry. The others will read the lesson correctly. Their kind is quick. It is the one virtue I have never disputed. And they will resign along their various horizons, and the experiment will close itself, and in 40 years it will be a paragraph. On method, I remind the sections of the standing principle which has served the college 3 centuries and will serve it 3 more. The decision precedes the cause. Causes are clerical, but the registry will find what is needed once the sections are agreed on what is true. I ask for your agreement by gray return before the month closes. I write none of this with appetite. I write it because the accord is a long thing and we are its keepers, and keeping long things means pruning short ones, and because every officer who reads this page knows it is true and has merely been waiting for someone whose office obliges him to say it. Under my hand and seal, Avener Thest, first warden, he read it to the end. Whatever else was said of him afterward, and everything was said of him afterward. He did not stop, and he did not soften a clause, and his voice, which had begun as a state paper, arrived at the final lines as something narrow and exposed that the relays carried into every gallery of the ring. The sound of a man hearing his own reasoning for the first time in the one room where it had to be audible, with the woman it had erased sitting level in his sightline, listening to him the way a surveyor listens to weather. The founder's acoustics let the last sentence stand in the air a moment, the way they had been built to. Then Crail said, "Counsel for the petitioner." Cyril Ahn rose. She had prepared, over 2 years, something close to 400 questions for this witness. She had cut them, in the final week, to a page. The night before, in the lamplight, with her client asleep between the towers of chaff, she had cut the page to 4 lines, because the circular, once read aloud, would have done all the heavy carriage there was to do, and the art now was to add nothing the room could hide in. She walked to the rail and stood at the geometry her client had chosen, so that, to face the advocate, the witness had to keep the envoy in frame. First warden, did you write every word you just read? I did. At the time you wrote it, the second week of coring, what offense had envoy June Sarah committed? A pause in 3 century acoustics. None. The strike order gives 3 causes. Who decided and who found, and first warden, the court has your own principle and evidence, so I am only asking you to apply it. Which came first, the decision or the causes? The decision, said Avener Thest, preceded the causes assembled. One more, and the petitioner is done with you. You wrote, every officer who reads this page knows it is true, and has merely been waiting for someone whose office obliges him to say it. Cyril let the sentence sit, and then, very quietly, in freight and pensions flat, she closed the siege, having now said it aloud. First warden, in this room, under the founder's right, in your own voice, with the accord listening, does it still sound true? The silence that followed was entered in the record by the clerk of the court in the manner of the old practice, with a duration, because the founders had ordered the keeping of silences in this room when silences did the work of testimony. The record of Surratt against the College of Envoy states it plainly, between the last question and the answer. A silence of some length. It sounds, said the first warden of the College of Envoys at the end of it, like a man who never once imagined being asked to read it. No further questions, Cyril said. The petitioner rests. Vale Odrin rose slowly, with the eyes of the accord on him, holding the most defended brief of his generation, and gathered, visibly, everything that 20 years of never losing had taught him. And Cyril, watching, knew exactly what a counsel of his quality could still do with re-examination. The small recoveries, the contexts, the long service mitigation, the talk-back wars, an hour of patient sanding until the circular's edges were dull enough to survive. He looked at the letter book on the rail. He looked longer at his client. The college has no questions for the witness, he said. The college rests. And then, in a private aside, the founder's acoustics declined to keep private 8 words, advocate to advocate, as he passed Cyril's table on the way down, that the official record never captured and every chancery bar on the ring printed by nightfall. 20 years, advocate. The first one worth losing. Closings were heard 3 days later, and they were brief on both sides. because the case had stopped being arguable somewhere around the 9th day of trial, and everyone of rank in the room knew it. What remained to argue was not what had happened but what the accord was going to do about the kind of thing it was. O'Droon went first and gave the closing of a man rebuilding the only thing still standing. Not innocence. He never once said the word, but the institution. The college was 3 centuries old, he said. It had carried the Accord's trust through wars, plagues, and the deaths of worlds. It was larger than its worst officers and older than its worst customs, and the court should cut out the rot. He said that too, rot, and the college's junior advocates stared at their table without burning the granary. Vacate the strike, compensate the envoy, refer the culpable, but leave the college its roles and its self-governance, because the accord had to be administered by something, and the something would always, in the end, be fallible officers keeping registers. There was nothing else available to build with anywhere in the galaxy, and there never had been. Then Cyrillon rose to close the siege and put her single page on the rail and looked at it once and did not read from it. My learned colleague is right, she said. That is the worst of this, assessors, and I will not pretend otherwise. He is right. Institutions are all we have. The petitioner believes that harder than anyone in this room, you have watched her for a season. She is the most institutional being the Accord has ever accredited. She read the charter and believed it. She read the lane law and believed it. She signed her name 14 times under a rule 3 centuries old because she believed the rule was load-bearing, and 200,000 beings are alive because the rule held. The college is not in this room because she lost faith in institutions. It is in this room because she kept faith and it could not bear the sight. You have heard the college's officers explain, in their own voices, what they keep in the drawer that faith is not allowed to open. The decision precedes the cause. Causes are clerical. Begin with the youngest. The lesson will carry. These are not the failures of fallible officers, assessors. Failure is a misfiled docket. This was governance, deliberate, written, circulated, agreed by Gray return before the month closed. The institution did not break its rules in the dark. It built a second set, in Gray, with a furnace at the end of the corridor, and it has been governing with them for 300 years. And the only reason the Accord knows is that the founders hid one sentence in the charter and one human read everything. The petitioner asks for her name, and the record has already given it back. What I ask is for the next name. Somewhere on the rolls today is a junior envoy of some kind the gallery will lose its appetite for in 30 years, and she is the true client of this petition. Do not leave her a favor that can be revoked. Leave her a rule with the charter's own teeth in it, that no servant of this Accord shall ever again be tried in Gray, sentenced in advance, and erased in the dark. The founders built this room so that everything done in the Accord's name could be said in it, out loud, to 60 seats. The college forgot. The court can make it unforgettable. She sat down. June Sarrett beside her did not whisper anything, did not touch her arm, did not move at all. She simply took the single unread page of the closing, squared it to the table's edge, and filed it in the document case with the rest of the record. And Cyrillon, who had practiced law for 40 years in a gallery where nobody important could find her, discovered that the gesture meant more to her than any verdict could. The court of the charter went out for 11 days. The ring did not wait quietly. The Brel Combine's 11 seats, which had filled an hour early for a strike reading 2 years before, gave a press declaration regretting the college's procedural lapses with the smooth speed of a fleet leaving an ally's harbor. 3 polities filed motions to appear at remedy. The Chancery bars argued remedies all night, every night. A delegation of the Accord's 17 other human envoys. June had never met most of them. The college had managed its experiment carefully across distant postings, arrived on Cauldrel Ring on the 6th day, and took up, without fuss, a rotation of chairs in the corridor outside the sealed assessor's wing, in pairs around the clock, doing nothing, saying nothing, reading dockets. The college could find no rule against sitting, and the image of them, young, patient, checking citations in shifts outside the locked door of the galaxy's oldest court, went out on every relay in the Accord and did more for the species standing, one veteran broadcaster observed, than a fleet review would have. On the 11th day, the bell of the first sitting rang for judgment, and the Accord stopped to listen. They read it jointly, the 3 of them, trading the text in sections in the manner of the founders' courts. Krail's docking laser rasp, Sora's manifest dry precision, Kavoth's slow amphibious weight, and the clerk's record of Sarrett against the College of Envoys, findings and remedy, runs to 41 pages, and the ring heard every one of them, but what the galaxy kept was the spine. The counts, all 3, found not merely unproven but fabricated, assembled after a decision already taken, and known to be false by the officers who certified them. The strike vacated from the root, not withdrawn, not forgiven, void as if it had never been, the line through the name unlawful ink from the first stroke. The cause file ordered published, whole unredacted, into the open record of the assembly beside the circular and the seal book pages, perpetually, the lie and its anatomy bound into the same volume as the lesson. Restitution in full, costs in full, the conduct review of counsel, and the termination of the fourth registrar declared retaliatory instruments expunged. First Warden Evanethist and former Registrar Coleth Vam referred to their own polities and barred for life from any office of the Accord touching a register, a credential, or a name, and then the remedy beyond the parties, the part Cyril had asked for with the next name, the part the assessors had plainly been building for 11 days, the part that the relays carried out to 190 worlds under the title it has held ever since. The court finds, read Melsora, that the customs of the college, the gray instrument, the unindexed council, the furnace at the corridor's end, constitute a standing breach of the Charter's first architecture, which is that the Accord shall not be governed by anything its officers cannot say. Under Article 9's remedial power, the court therefore adopts, as standing rule of the Accord, binding on the college and every chartered organ, the following, to be cited as the rule of present cause. First, no servant of the Accord shall be struck, suspended, or diminished in standing except upon cause stated in open session, in the servant's presence, with the cause file published to the rolls before the vote. Second, no deliberation touching a servant's standing shall be exempt from index. What is written shall be producible. What is burned shall be presumed against the burner. Third, in any challenge to a stated cause, the authors of the cause shall be subject, as of right, to the reading of authors. The founders kept silences in this room, Sora finished, looking up from the page directly at the college's table, because they understood that institutions rot in the unsaid. The court has now heard the college say what it governed by. The Accord will not be asked to hear it twice. Crail took the final section's 6 lines, and the founder's acoustics carried his old voice without effort to the corridor and the relays and the 17 envoys sitting in their patient chairs. Judgment for the petitioner on every count. The registrar who next holds office is directed to restore the name of June Serrett to the rolls. Of standing, not by clerical entry. The court has read 2 years of this institution's clerical entries. The name was taken in public, by voice, before the assembly of the Accord. It will be returned the same way in open session, and the record of this court will note one further direction, which the assessors adopt unanimously and decline to explain, because the reasons are in the transcript. She signs it herself. The bell rang once, small and clear, and the case of Serrett against the College of Envoys was over, and the Tessin Accord began that same hour, the long, uncomfortable work of being an institution that had heard itself out loud. Evanethist resigned before his recall ship docked. He issued no statement, sought no interview, and was last recorded by a freight manifest some chancery wit later framed and hung in a bar on the 6th gallery departing Cauldrel Ring as supernumerary passenger, uncredentialed, the first journey of his adult life taken without a seal. His polity convened its own inquiry. Its findings were published in open session with the cause file laid before the vote, under a procedural rule its parliament had adopted with attribution 11 days after Sora read it. The rule of present cause crossed the Accord faster than the relays carried it. Within the year, 19 member polities had folded some version of it into their own charters, and constitutional scholars on worlds that had never seated a human were publishing commentaries on the jurisprudence of the audible. The gray stock itself became unobtainable on the ring, not banned, merely something no officer could now be seen to hold. The college survived, as Odrun had argued it must, and the surviving was the punishment and the cure at once. Every reading of every cause in open session, with the servant present, every deliberation indexed, every author aware, stylus in hand, of a chair and a rail and a right waiting for any sentence that could not survive its own voice. The college's officers discovered what the founders had always intended them to know in their valves and their blood, that the only writing safe from the reading of authors was a writing you would be willing to read, and 3 centuries of gray custom died, not of prohibition but of audibility. Coleth Vam's successor as Registrar of the Rolls was confirmed in the spring. The college, in what the Ring understood as the institution's first honest sentence in a generation, reached past 40 senior candidates and appointed the Keeper of Seals. Ondu Raim accepted the office on 2 conditions, both entered in the minutes: that the seal books of 300 years be merged at last into the open index, and that the registry's vacant 4th chair be filled by appointment of the registrar. Whereupon, 90 years old and savoring every second of it, he sent a single-line instrument by open post, logged, indexed, and copied to the assembly, to a sacked clerk living on dock work and his clan's stubbornness. The registry has located your name, which was never lawfully removed. Report Ream Registrar. Pelyov reported to his desk. In time, but that is a later story, told in another generation's chancery bars. He would hold the keepership himself, and juniors would whisper that old keeper Ayov made every apprentice copy out one ancient human matter docket, complete by hand, before they were permitted to press a single seal, and that the only commandment he ever gave them was 4 words long, and they were not the college's 4 words. Paper should protect people. The conduct review of Advocate Cyril On was expunged so thoroughly that the guild, embarrassed, overcorrected. They tried to give her a chair on the licensing board. She declined it by return post and kept her chambers on the 9th gallery, where the corridor wall opposite her door had been scrubbed by some anonymous hand the night of the verdict, and where the Evolved Needs ledger page, full to its last line, now hung framed above the tea cabinet. Bren's idea, executed without permission while she was at the judgment sitting, and never taken down. The clients came back, of course, and brought with them a kind she had never had. The struck, the diminished, the quietly erased, of every species, from every organ of the accord, carrying their strike orders and their impossible docket numbers to the small, Muric advocate who had opened the drawer. She took the ones whose arithmetic was wrong. Bren articled now, her pupil, halfway to a charter oath of his own, kept their files in duplicate, page-sealed weekly, out of a professional paranoia that had become the chamber's religion and twice more proved its worth. She was never again shrub height. She found, to her continuing surprise, that the weather was survivable. The restoration was held at the quarterly session of standing, in Vaillant's Hall, before the full assembly of the Tessin Accord. 2 years to the season from the morning, a strike order had been read to packed and appetited galleries. The galleries were packed again. The appetite, Cyril thought, looking up from the floor at the 190 worlds worth of faces, had changed its diet. The new registrar of the rolls conducted it from the high desk, ancient and unhurried, with the great current volume of the rolls of standing open before him, at a page where one line of ink had been ruled through 2 years before. By the court's direction, the vacatur was read first, whole, Melsora's findings, the word fabricated landing in the founder's liturgical cadence like stone set down, and then Andu Rame closed the order, looked out over the assembly of the accord, and said, in the riverbed base that needed no relays. The court has directed that what was taken by voice be returned by voice, and that the name be entered by its own hand. The rolls of standing are open. Envoy Serret approached the book. June Serret crossed the floor of Vaillant's Hall alone, 11 steps. Cyril, from the advocates' gallery, counted them again, in her envoy's charcoal, carrying nothing, her hands loose at her sides, while 17 human envoys and 1 orticled Seleth clerk and a chamber of 190 worlds watched her come. If she felt the weight of it, the banked fire face declined, as always, to leak the inside of the skull into open air. She stopped at the high desk. The registrar turned the book to face her and offered the stylus across it, formally with both hands, the way seals had been passed in the deep registry for 3 centuries. She took it and signed her name into the rolls of standing of the Tessin Accord, below the line-through ink of the lie and the court's citation that voided it. June Serret, envoy, in the level machined hand that had built a concordance of 41 crates, and the assembly, which had no rule for what it did next and looked for none, stood, all of it. The tiers, the galleries, the proxies, the corridor, the Brel seats too, everyone, which the relays noted and the ring discussed for a season, 190 worlds, on their feet in the glass-belled light, for a junior human envoy signing her own name. She blotted the line. She inclined her head to the registrar with perfect courtesy. And then, the relays caught it, and it traveled to worlds that will never seat a human, and it is the image that survives when the 41 pages of findings have become a citation. June Serret turned to the open floor and the watching accord and did the one thing in 2 years of siege that nobody had priced. She smiled, briefly, levelly, the smile of a surveyor whose arithmetic has come back checked and true. Then she walked to the human delegation's bench, took her old seat among the 17 as though returning from a meal, opened the docket case, and went back to work, because the Vessing Corridor Tariff Review was scheduled for that same afternoon, and she had, as she informed the startled junior beside her, read everything. Cyril On watched from the advocate's gallery until the session turned to freight schedules, which had once been her whole world and were now her holiday. Then she gathered her case and went down toward the 9th gallery, through corridors where clerks of 6 species stood aside for her now, past the door of the seal office, where a young Tellurite at the 4th desk raised a hand without looking up from his impressions. Bren had the lamps lit and the tea drawn and a new strike order already squared on her desk. A Vethry Lane warden this time, struck by a port authority, the dates not quite holding, the docket number a week too old. The galaxy was very large, and it was full of institutions, and the institutions were full of drawers. Worth checking? Bren asked. Cyril picked up the loop her old teacher had given her 40 years ago for reading freight seals and bent to the arithmetic. Everything is worth checking, she said. That's the verdict. The rest was paperwork. And far above them, in the great glass-belled hall, in a book 3 centuries deep where every line was a world's word made visible, there stood, small, level in her own hand, beneath the voided ink of every certainty the gallery had ever had an appetite for, the restored signature of June Sarrett, human envoy of the Tessin Accord. Proof, perpetual and producible and indexed at last, that the lie had needed the dark, and the name had only ever needed to be read aloud.